Agenda
Daniel
item
across
two.
the sentences, apologies, Chair, sorry.
Thanks, Justin. Agenda item 2 then is chairperson's business. Can I refer members to correspondence from the Speaker to committee chairs on business committee decisions at page 5 of your packs? The Speaker notes that additional plenary business has been scheduled for Wednesdays and that legislation will be expected to be the priority for plenary time in the remaining sittings of the mandate. The Business Committee has agreed that it would be helpful if committees could avoid bringing non-essential motions to the Assembly for debate before dissolution. Looks like they've asked us not to bother meeting on a Wednesday as well without any correspondence with us. But such is the busyness of the schedule. Are members content to note that correspondence? Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item 2.2 is increasing the diversity of witnesses before Assembly committees. I refer members to correspondence from the Chairperson's Liaison Group on increasing the diversity of witnesses before Assembly committees, page 8 of your packs. Members content to note?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Can I also refer members to correspondence from the Chairperson's Liaison Group on strengthening committee scrutiny report at page 19? Members wish to comment and reply to the Chairperson's Liaison Group or content to note for now?
Content to note, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item 3, members, is draft minutes. Can I refer you to draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 16th of February 2022 at page 196 of your packs and seek your agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Agreed?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. There are no matters arising, which takes us to correspondence. Can I refer you to page 206, where we have 24 items of correspondence and a summary note at page 207. Clerk, do you wish to speak to the correspondence?
Yes, please, Chair. Members, item 5.2 on page 211 is a response from the Department of Education regarding the department's budget. You will be familiar with some of that material, having rehearsed it yesterday. We will try to find an opportunity to get an update on budget before the end of term, but as you can see, our windows of opportunity are narrowing even more. Also, in the response, there's a bit about air filtration and the funding behind that. So you may wish to raise parts of that in relation to air filtration for schools with the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, who will be briefing the committee shortly. Is there anything else members would like to say on that piece of correspondence?
I think we can note that for now and maybe come back to it if necessary, Clerk.
Thank you. Item 5.3 on page 218 is correspondence from the Department of Education forwarding a response from the Minister to Anne Grasson, Gail Lynn, regarding Irish language uptake in English medium primary schools. So members, some of you were keen to have a response on that. Are there any actions that you would like to take now?
Members content to note? Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Item 5.4 on page 245 is correspondence from the department regarding its spring supplementary estimates. Again, you'll have rehearsed that in plenary yesterday, but there wasn't a lot of broken down detail, what we call granular detail, in the estimate. Our members agreed to ask to the department seeking more of that.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you. Item 5.5 on page 284 is correspondence from the department regarding a temporary modification of education duties notice made under the Coronavirus Act. This requires the provision of adequate meals for pupils who can't attend schools owing to the incidence or transmission of coronavirus. Are members content to note that one?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Item 5.6 on page 292 is correspondence from the Committee for Finance to the Minister regarding the period products free provision bill. if members, if you're content to note that, we can forward the correspondence to the bill sponsor. The Committee for Finance is also recommending that there should be a steer from an executive minister.
What page is that on again, Evan?
5.6, sorry, it's item 5.6 on page 292.
Chair, just given that piece of correspondence it's there, do we have any idea where the period products bill stands at the minute?
The sponsor has moved it to the business committee and asked the business committee to schedule it. And I understand that there just is such a lot of executive business that it's maybe slower getting the private members' bill scheduled. But I haven't seen it appear on the indicative timings yet. I don't think Robbie's with us, is he? He might know a wee bit more. Robbie is there actually. He's maybe on a call just now. So
Perhaps,
it should
Evan,
be here.
we could contact the bill sponsor just to ask if there's for an update and ask if there's any other help that we can give.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly, Chair. I'll do that. Okay, so item 5.7 then on page 295 is correspondence from the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs regarding a response from DAERA on the use of glyphosate-based products by maintenance section in the Education Authority. Members will remember that we wrote a couple of times to DAERA committee on the basis of findings by the Pink Ladies organisation that are similar being used on the education estate. So
Sorry
DAERA's
to interrupt you. If I could just ask members to go into mute unless they're speaking. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. DAERA's response outlines a timeline within which it's still allowed to use glyphosate, and this current EU approval then set to last until the 15th of December 2022. Do members have any views on that one, or are you content to note for now? We can forward it.
Content that to and if you forward that on, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Item 5.8 on page 299 is correspondence from Belcoo Traffic Calming to the department. So our department, the Department for Infrastructure and the Committee for Infrastructure, calling for traffic calming measures around St Columban's Primary School, Belcoo. Members, as you know, the committee doesn't action, individual cases, but we can, if you're content, we can write to DE and the Department of Infrastructure referring those concerns and seeking a written briefing on school traffic calming and road safety arrangements at schools and asking to be copied in. Is that agreed?
Agreed, members?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 5.9 then on page 309 is correspondence welcoming the rollout of vaccination to 5 to 11-year-olds and asking the committee to support a swift rollout of that programme. Are members content to note that, or do you have views you'd like to convey?
Yeah, perhaps we could write to the Health Minister to get detail in relation to the implementation of vaccination for 5 to 11-year-olds to forward on. Members content?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. So there are a couple of dates in there for your diaries. Those have been in the correspondence before. And then items 513 to 525 on pages 331 to 344 of the meeting papers and pages 3 to 16 of table papers are correspondence regarding concerns on the Integrated Education Bill. We had some letters like this last week as well, members, and the committee agreed to write correspondence informing them that the committee stage of that bill finished on the 24th of November 2021. Its further consideration stage has now been scheduled for tomorrow, and signposting the committee's report on the Integrated Education Bill. Are members content then to do this, to do similarly for this set of correspondence?
Content.
Agreed.
Thank you. And are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note then at page 207? with the exception of the things I've mentioned.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Clark. That takes us to our forward work programme. And can I refer members to the draft forward work programme on page 347 of your meeting papers? Clark, do you want to speak to the forward work programme?
Certainly, Chair. So, members, you'll see that after last week's meeting, there'd been agreement to try to take as many single briefing meetings as we could on the priority areas that members had mentioned. So today's is the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors on ventilation in schools. The 2nd of March will be a children and young people strategy update from the department, and we'll put the first draft of the legacy report in front of members as well. The 8th of March then would be a Tuesday meeting at 9 to 10:30, and SIA can come and give an update on exams to the committee that day. That's also International Women's Day. So there will be a lot of events, I'm sure. 9th of March, the EA leadership team will bring an update on the reviews in relation to effectiveness and governance and SEN. 10th of March, so that's Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday next week. The Northern Ireland Teaching Council is confirmed, and potentially there'd be kind of a short sub-item where the Substitute Teachers Manifesto brief the committee. We were still hoping to get a visit to the planetarium on the 16th of March. My team has done a recce. There would be a discussion of STEM subjects at the planetarium, and then a briefing from STEAM NI, which is interested in not only STEM but arts together. And the committee had indicated that it might take a briefing from CBI on coding at that time. But that's a wee bit indicative because plenary is taking up such a lot of time, and I'm not sure that you members will be able to leave Parliament buildings or able to be unavailable for plenary, if you know what I mean. So I'd be really grateful if members could come back to me and indicate whether they're available for that on the 16th of March. The 23rd of March then would be the final meeting before dissolution, and you'll see that there are a series of options that the committee has been interested in. One of them being an outdoor visit to the Forest Schools NI or Lorne Guiding Centre. So again, if members want to give me a steer on that, that would be really helpful.
Okay. Members, any comments at this stage? Content to note for now.
Sure.
Yeah, Justin, is that?
Can we maybe have a hybrid option for the planetarium if plenary does interfere, so that we could still have that visit and members have the option of still doing it online?
I think, unfortunately, hybrid isn't an option because the planetarium, although it has a really great public, address and teleconferencing system, it doesn't have Starleaf, and we don't have the capacity to make it into a Starleaf location, Justin. So it might work best as informal meetings where the team write up a report of the briefings and then report that into the formal meeting the next time that the whole committee meets.
Or the whole committee could just go and visit wonderful Armagh City and our fantastic planetarium. That might be the best idea. Sure.
I'll try and help you there, Justin. Clark, if I'm right, at this moment in time, there is no plenary business scheduled on the 16th of March, correct?
No, yeah, that's correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
so I think we can, insofar as it is not a disproportionate amount of work for anyone involved, keep that as an indicative plan and do our very best to attend in person, but perhaps have a provisional arrangement in place should plenary business be scheduled for that day for any reason. Does that sound like a fair way forward? Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. In terms of the 23rd of March, which is the last meeting, and I'm conscious there's a lot of meetings 8th, 9th and 10th of March, but we really are down to the wire here, and I don't think any of those proposed sessions are in any way superfluous. SEA on exams, EA leadership, Northern Ireland Teaching Council, I think they're all organisations that would want to engage with a final time before the end of the mandate. And then on the final meeting on the 23rd of March, Clark, I think it might be useful to try and have the Fiscal Council at that in relation to the budget, given that there is a degree of uncertainty in relation to PFGs and budgets in terms of what happens the other side of the election, and the Fiscal Council insight on the budget may be very useful. I think it'd be really useful as well if we could have a final day meeting with the minister as well, if at all possible. It would be interesting to hear the education minister's views on the urgent medium-term and long-term challenges for education as well, given that we're going into an election without a clear and firm commitment from all parties to form an executive. So I think Education Minister and Fiscal Council on the 23rd of March would be really welcome. Would members agree?
Great, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, can I seek the committee's agreement to endorse the forward work programme as amended? Agreed? Okay, thank you. That takes us then to agenda item 7, delivering a better education estate for future generations. And we know how important that is and the scale of the challenge to achieve that. So delighted that we're taking an oral briefing from the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors on this matter. Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove members from
Chair, can I just send an apology from Diane? She just sent me a message there. She's not able to make it. So Chair and Elaine, if we could note that, okay? Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for that, Harry. After that then, can I ask Broadcasting to remove members from the spotlight and to add witnesses? And can I refer members to a presentation from the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors at page 18 of your tabled papers, and give a warm welcome to Emmett McDonough-Brown, the RICS Senior Public Affairs Officer, Paul Bagast, Head of Land and Property Standards at RICS, and advise witnesses that can give you up to 10 minutes for an opening statement, followed by questions from our members. Thanks very much indeed for being with us today.
And thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to come and talk to the committee about this important topic. I do have a presentation which I will share on the screen, and you'll be pleased to hear that it's not going to be kind of death by PowerPoints. I think we'd like this session to be as interactive as possible. So hopefully everybody can see the full screen slides in front of you. So my name is Emmett McDonough-Brown. I'm the Senior Public Affairs Officer for Northern Ireland for the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and I'm joined by my colleague Paul Bagast, who is the Head of Property Standards for the institution. And I suppose I wanted to start off just briefly by explaining who we are. So RICS is a global professional body. We've been established for over 150 years. We accredit over 100,000 members with the qualification across the globe and over 10,000 firms. And we are incorporated by a charter which requires us to promote the usefulness of the profession for the advantage of the public and in other parts of the world. So our members work across land, real estate, construction and infrastructure, and we're part of the teams which help large-scale construction projects turn into reality. In Northern Ireland, we have over 1,700 professionals working across those different disciplines. We have a close relationship with our partner organisation in the Republic of Ireland, the Society of Chartered Surveyors of Ireland. And I suppose our members work across all stages of the asset life cycle. So from the inception of a project to its delivery and its decommissioning. So at every stage, our members are involved in that work. And there are about over 20 specialisms within the surveying profession, but most of our members in Northern Ireland, they work in the building surveying, quantity surveying, valuation, and commercial property disciplines. So whenever you buy a house, for example, you may have it surveyed to assess its quality and condition, and it'll be valued by one of our members. And I suppose just to pick out that the profile of members in Northern Ireland is overwhelmingly one of small and medium enterprises, which reflects the wider economy. And I suppose what separates us from other organisations in this arena is that we regulate our members as well. So our regulatory model applies to everybody who is a member across the world, and we have a single standard that we hold our members to. And by assuring and when necessary enforcing those standards, we provide confidence into markets. And I think it's important to get a sense of the sorts of work that our members undertake. So you'll see here in front of you some of the projects in Northern Ireland that our members have been involved in delivering. A social housing project out in the northwest, the Ormer Avenue sewage project in Belfast, Hillsborough Castle, and hospital projects at the Royal. So those are the sorts of projects that our members are involved in. And I suppose at this stage, I'm going to hand over to Paul Vegas, who's our Head of Property Standards, to talk through how this standard of ours can help deliver a better educational experience in Northern Ireland. So, Paul, over to you, sir.
Hi, thank you, Emmett, and thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us. And yeah, really excited to talk about the International Building Operations Standard. If we skip on, Emmett. And really, I mean, it's really interesting, the evolution of real estate, and there's a tendency to talk about offices, I think, and I'm always really anxious to talk about other types of buildings because they're really critical to our to our strategy, and the role of buildings has changed, and I think it's really interesting how knowledgeable most people are about what they expect from a building in terms of the experience it provides. And the IBOS standard really is a sort of framework document, but it really talks about sort of two things. One is around data, which is in RCS at its heart is an organization around measurement. How do you measure in order to benchmark, in order to improve? And then it's really around the people, the user experience. And those are kind of the two things that are really sort of changing in terms of the role that real estate plays, and that applies in a school every bit as it applies in a in a hospital or a prison or an office. I mean, it's really about creating environments that support the users to deliver and provide whatever they're supposed to do in that environment. And I think it's really important that we get to a point where we can actually start to measure some of those things in order to improve. And IBOS at its heart it's not a regulatory sort of standard. It's really about how do we create and improve buildings for the users. And if you skip to the next slide, Emmett, because I'm conscious of time, the piece that's really interesting is, and this is where we've sort of taken this all around the world and had lots of conversations, that the data that you need to capture at the very sort of highest level needs to be quite broad. This is quite a holistic approach to a building, because buildings are complex, but the concept is very simple in terms of what do you need to know and what do you need to measure in order to ensure that the building is performing as well as it can. So the concept of IBOS is 5 very simple pillars of data, and these pillars are all connected, and therefore if you only focus on one of those pillars, you won't get that holistic approach to measuring the performance of the building. So very quickly we can start sort of the compliant pillar is an absolutely kind of critical pillar. So in schools, we're talking about, are you measuring temperature? Are you measuring air quality? Are you looking at the sort of health and safety? Are you looking at the noise? And how does that connect to the user experience? And that's the kind of connection that you need to look. And then we're looking at organizations and saying, the function of the building. That's really just saying, how much space do you have? How is that space being used? What's the density? What's the optimization? Do you understand how you're using the space, so that you can then start to make decisions about how you might change that to reflect the user need? And the third pillar, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, is really around the costs. And a lot of real estate conversations will come down to the ability to understand and have a really good view on life cycle and operating costs. Absolutely central to any real estate strategy. It's about identifying the areas that you might want to invest in, and then being able to kind of measure. And this is where we start talking about the value. So you've got sort of inputs, and then you've got the outputs, And I'm sure, you've spoken at length about the need for buildings to be sustainable and socially, socially impactful. So again, you know, the ability to measure some of those things. So what's the operational energy used, but also, things like what's your waste strategy? How much food are you sort of bringing in, or how much furniture are you bringing in? What's the sort of life cycle of the sort of continuous ability to create sustainable environments? So it's about waste, water, etc., but also the social impact. How is the building supporting your social impact strategy? And then the final one, which is really important, which is really what we're trying to get to, is actually delivering environments which are providing great places to do whatever it is that building is there to do. So how are you measuring well-being? How are you measuring the experience, productivity, if that's an appropriate measure, the user satisfaction that comes with it? And the interesting piece is, how are those things connected? So just an example, you may have an issue with air quality, you may have an issue with cleaning, and you may say, actually, we want to introduce better sort of contactless cleaning stations for people post-COVID. So that has a cost implication, but then the benefit you would see would be in the performance and the experience and the feedback that you get for people say, actually, this is now, a really fantastic, safe environment where we feel really comfortable, and we're enjoying being here, and we want to come here, and we want to learn in this environment. So it's the connections, and how do these pillars and indicators enable you to sort of make business cases and articulate to senior people, how do you want to go forward? We are interestingly, and if I get a chance, I'll put it on the screen. It's a very rough, but we are developing a sort of self-assessment tool, which is deliberately sort of simple, but it would have each of the pillars, and then there's sort of 4 levels of assessment where you can say we're not measuring any of this, to the ability to say we are measuring this, we use this data, and we use it to report on, and etc. And then we benchmark and we improve, and then you can get a sort of an IBOS score, and it's going to be really useful. It'll be free, anybody can use it, and then we start to be able to kind of benchmark performance and improvement and identify areas where we can improve. So you may have a fantastically functional space, you may think, but actually the user experience is really poor, or your sustainability use is really poor. And you go, well, how can we improve that? There may be a cost, there may not. I'm curious what's on the next slide, Emmett. There you go. Okay, so I think that just kind of says some of the stuff that, and this is the really interesting piece, that people are really kind of understanding this now. You can go into any building anywhere in the world, and if you're in a good building. It doesn't matter if it's a school or a retail outlet or an office. You know if it's too hot or too cold, or the space is not appropriate, or you can't get a coffee, or the people were rude. And I think there's a huge impact on things like well-being, the link between air quality, the link between having good light and good, a good space, but also things like noise and how disruptive noise can be in an environment. And how do you mitigate that? It's complicated, but it's understanding and measuring the right things will enable you to make those decisions, because it does have a huge impact on environment, on society, etc., etc. So I think there's lots of evidence out there. And the next slide. Okay, so there's lots of people involved in this process, and and that's important. That you've got end users, you've got technology firms who are doing amazing things. You've obviously got RICS organisations who can advise, etc. I know, we've done some work in Northern Ireland previously, and there's lots of sort of very talented people, and it's very collaborative, I think, these days. So we're seeing lots of different partners coming in and really identifying and how to improve and measure, etc. And I think that is that the last slide, Emma, or is there one more?
It is indeed.
If I've got a minute, I can try and put the self-assessment tool on it. I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead. We're reasonably okay for time there. You stayed well within time, perfect timing. And that, can I just remind the members that presentation that you've just gone through is at page 19. Page 18 of our tabled packs. If people want to go back and refer to any of that. Back to you, Paul. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I hope you can see that. So this is a very rough sort of outline, and I'm probably not supposed to share this yet because we haven't really sort of tested it. And obviously we're looking to run some tests, but you can see along the top. So you have these 5 pillars, And then you've got the ability to look at temperature and say, well, sort of level 1, are we capturing the temperature? And there's a definition, or at level 5 where we're using it, etc. And you go through very quick to do, and you get to a point where and then at the end you sort of get this sort of score where you say the overall sort of self-assessment score is X, Y, and Z, and then for each pillar you would also get a score, and then you could really identify where you can improve. And I think that's important. What we want to get to, as Emmett said, we're very much in the public interest. That's the priority, and I think it's a really important public interest issue to have buildings that are sustainable, high performing, safe environments where people can go and know that they can deliver the service they're supposed to do as well as they can. So the tool, as I said, will be free. Anybody can use it, and then the data that you can pull through starts to create the sort of benchmark, and then you'll be able to really kind of then do something and then reassess it and see if you've improved, etc. And there are lots of ways to do that. So I just wanted to share that with you just as an example of what that might look like going forward. So I'll take it off the screen, but hopefully that was within the time, Chris, and very happy to answer any questions myself.
Thank you.
We'll do our best.
It was as within the time as any of my members ever stay. Thank you, Paul. Emmett, Paul, thanks very much indeed. I think this is even more relevant and applicable to the educational estate than I had expected. And maybe we'll create some time here for members to ask some questions. But yeah, in terms of the International Building Operation Standard, one can see how the indicators can be really applicable to schools. And I think as one of the key actions coming out of the meeting today, I'll be proposing that we contact the Department of Education, the Education Minister, and ask to what extent International Building Operations Standards pillars are applied to the construction and assessment of the state of repair of schools across Northern Ireland. I mean, in terms of compliance, particularly at this moment in time, air quality, health and safety, in terms of functionality, user experience, economic operating costs, sustainability, and then particularly in terms of performance, what well-being outcomes are being achieved, how is the infrastructure affecting educational outcomes, community outcomes. We often hear that school buildings should be community hubs as well. So I think it'd be really interesting to hear how, I think the Department of Education uses a school handbook for the construction of school buildings, but I'm not sure what level of assessment happens after the construction. Be really, really interesting. And then the IBOS score as well, I think, could be a really useful guide. So I'll certainly be following that up with that question. To your knowledge, do you know to what extent the Department of Education is interacting with IBOS pillars and applying IBOS pillars to school buildings in Northern Ireland?
I mean, we have been in contact with the Education Authority around how they might integrate it into some of their kind of procurement frameworks, because, I think we would be of a similar mind in that respect. That's, how these concepts are applied to the construction and repair of schools in Northern Ireland, has tremendous value in terms of the outcomes that we all kind of want to see. I'm not sure, Paul, if there's anything you want to add.
Only that IBOS is quite new, so we've only just sort of launched it. So I think at the moment we've certainly talked to lots and lots of stakeholders, and Emmett's been particularly good in Northern Ireland, and but we haven't had any firm commitments. We've certainly spoken to the sort of UK central government team about how they embed it, and that piece, the link between construction and use, is really, really interesting. And I think that's the sweet spot, that to say actually, you have to think about how the building is used. It's not just about how the building will look, and there's a relationship, and that's really, really important. And I've always used schools in any presentation as an example, just so people don't just think about offices, because everyone wants to think about a brand new sort of shiny office environment. And actually, those kind of 5 pillars are really just common sense. I mean, we wrote it and just said, look, if you only measure one thing, you don't get the performance, quite right. So, and if you measure them all in 5 different ways, again, you're not going to be able to get that clarity and consistency. So if we can all start to think about, cost and function and compliance and sustainability and performance, that well-being, and so, and then we get this kind of, really, really powerful data where we can actually say, and it's not about saying to people, you're not performing well. It's about saying, look, here's how you can improve. It's not about saying you've got a bad, because every building is slightly different, and there's, old buildings, new ones, different, different challenges. But it's just saying, look, measure these things. You will learn a lot, and you will be able to improve that. And I think that's where we're at. So, watched it last week. So we're and we're really happy to partner with people on the self-assessment.
Paul, they may be simple and obvious, but sometimes the simple and obvious is the really helpful approach.
Really,
and it just looks incredibly applicable to the school estate, and we await to be reassured by the Department of Education that they already have a similar approach, but it also adds a level of transparency as well, and that the assessment tool interests me also, because we as a committee are frequently told that the school estate across Northern Ireland is in a really poor state of repair. There's a need for multiple new builds. There's a need for extensive maintenance and repair, but you could see how an IBOS pillars, an IBOS assessment tool approach could maybe allow reporting in a bit more of a simple way as well. Like it's definitely generated interest and consideration for me here. My last question before I bring other members in is, obviously air quality and air ventilation is of a extreme priority and concern for schools at this moment in time. Would you either of you like to say anything in relation to what is being done or what needs to be done in schools in Northern Ireland in that regard?
Yeah, it's the real challenge, isn't it? And I mean, it's such a great example of, because that economic pillar sits right there, and it sort of stares at you and it says, right, we can do a lot here. There's a lot of amazing sort of technology and sensors and air filters, etc. But they come at a cost, and then the value that you'd see in terms of, having a building that is very, very safe and compliant and delivering, and therefore you're kind of mitigating all the issues that may arise in the future. So it's really, I think the point really is that the solution that you come up with would be informed by the fact that if you say, look, we don't have any information on this, right? We're not measuring this at all. That's not really acceptable, right? So you would say, look, you're going to have to start thinking about what sort of approach you're going to take to measuring air quality and filtration. And if you don't know, then it would be good to kind of work that out. And then the solution you're going to be able to come up with, a lot of it would depend on that economic pillar. There are some fantastic, I know lots of organizations who are delivering amazing systems and, et cetera, technology. And there are other ways of doing it that would be probably more cost effective. But
well, that's helpful.
And it just becomes very strategic in the fact that you can articulate quite quickly a business case up to the finance director or the whoever it is who's making those decisions, or an HR type person, and say, well, actually, we don't do this. The standard says we ought to kind of do this. Here's some approaches. There's a list, and these would be the benefits, and then you can start make decisions. But there is a range of kind of options that would be available.
That's helpful. Let me bring some of our colleagues in. Can I bring in Pat Sheehan, MLA, Deputy Chairperson of the committee? Thanks.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to Emmett and Paul for their presentations this morning. And it's really interesting subject, and in terms of the International Building Operations Standards as an assessment tool. I mean, it seems so powerful in its logic one wonders why it isn't always used, or something along those lines. And in terms of how a building should measure up to each of the pillars, and then how it measures up overall, is really interesting concept. And I suppose the pandemic has brought into sharp relief just how bad some of our school estate is. And particularly in recent months, when the issue of air purification, air filtration, and so on came to came to the fore. So you have schools that where the windows were actually painted shut and couldn't be open, so you couldn't get fresh air into the room. You had schools that had CO2 monitors, and even when the windows were open, the monitor was still showing up red, and all of those problems, and so we have kids sitting in their classroom wrapped in overcoats and scarves. Their feet are freezing and so on. So, and I mean, I want to sort of focus fairly narrowly on this issue of air filtration, and I'm not sure what level of expertise you have in this issue, Paul. But I'm just wondering, and of course, I mean, the problem in all of this quite often is funding, and whether funding is available or not. And like any department, the education department is usually crying poverty, especially when there's some extra spending required right across the school estate. So, we have a sort of mixed bag of old schools, more recently built schools, and then very new schools, each having their own unique problems. So, in terms of the issue of air filtration or purification, how would you approach that issue? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sort of probably disappointing, but I'm no expert in air filtration systems. That's the sort of building services kind of engineer, but that's a sort of hard FM service, and it's, and I think the interesting piece is what you've touched on there is what people necessarily haven't done in the past is link things, because you talked about kids sitting there freezing cold and stuff like that, and that's the user experience, right? And it's like saying people didn't join the dot and say, actually, we'll paint the windows shut because it might save us, pennies or something, and etc. And they never thought about how the building was going to be used. And now, because of COVID, or maybe it's accelerated it, we're very much about saying, if the best we can do is open the windows and make the kids freezing, then we have to do better than that in terms of our property real estate strategy to support the user, being the children. So, and I think that's the connection. But it's that cost piece that becomes an issue. So I wouldn't. I mean, I'm no expert on air filtration systems, etc. So I probably wouldn't go too much into the detail on it. But there is a kind of range of solutions, and they don't necessarily have to absolutely. There would be a kind of cost implication, etc. But the benefit in terms of the improvements you would see in children's performance and their kind of general well-being would be so significant that you could make a very strong business case for it based on that. I think we could certainly bring a sort of an expert in the subject along to subsequent meetings to talk about how they work and how you can deliver them at different levels in terms of that. But I wouldn't probably best not too far into it.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to put you on a spot.
No, it's fine. Well, there's a lot of things I don't know anything about. So,
Well, I suppose one of the difficulties we have is once the issue of air filtration was mentioned in the committee, we had approaches from all sorts of different companies who supply air filtration devices, and I'm not in any way casting aspersions on them. They're in business, and that's fair enough. The difficulty for us is in the science, because on the one hand you have people saying, these devices are useless, and
Yeah,
on the other hand, you have people saying, no, these are very useful for purifying air, and particularly in areas like a classroom. And you have a plug-in device; it's just a
yeah,
unit that plugs into the wall. So I'm not even asking you to comment on that. I'm just making a comment myself, and that's the difficulty we face. So it would be useful, perhaps, because while things seem to have improved in terms of the pandemic, there's no guarantee we're not going to hit a future upsurge, which will be more deadly than the one we've sort of just come through over the last couple of months. So it'd be useful to speak to someone who didn't have a vested interest
yeah.
in selling devices. So anyway, thanks for that. It was useful and interesting. Thank you.
No, thanks,
Thanks,
Pat.
Pat. Can I bring in Robbie Butler? Or sorry, Harry Harvey, MLA, please? Harry Harvey, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emmett and Paul. Yes, indeed, and very interesting. Just wondering, first of all, in terms of numbers, have you looked at every school?
So, Harry, we haven't looked at schools in terms of how this might apply. I suppose what we're kind of talking through is the potential of this kind of approach to inform what happens with the schools estate. So that may be a question for the department.
Okay, okay. And I mean, would you be finding as surveyors that the older schools would always be more inefficient than a new school, or can old schools be sometimes just as efficient or economic?
I suppose that's what this approach would explain. So if you put each of the individual buildings through the kind of self-assessment tool, that will grade them in terms of where they sit in the in terms of compliance with all the pillars. So that would be something that the schools or kind of the estates directors of the schools could do to kind of understand really where they sit. I suppose we're not giving the answer. We're maybe the way I think of it is helping them ask the question.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
it's a good question, because when you talk about sort of benchmarking, you have to be able to benchmark like with like. I mean, that's an important. So if you have a 100-year-old building, it's
yeah.
very difficult to benchmark against a brand new one, which probably has lots of lots better in terms of insulation and performance. So I think you want to factor that in. I think, as Emmett says, that the point is about make sure you measure those things, and then you can benchmark, you can improve yourself really. The more we get. We've had great. It's really interesting the sorts of people that I was talking yesterday to a big education estate based in Singapore, and it's a huge kind of learning facility, etc. And they've got a lot of technology, and they're probably quite interested in using iBoss as a tool, as are interestingly people like Apple in California who think it could be helpful for their retail estate. So there's lots of different sort of uses for it at so many different levels in terms of, but the concept saying this information will help you, that particular one building will help you. And the more buildings we can get, the better the benchmarks, I think, would become. And then we can learn and, identify solutions and those kind of things. But yeah, it's a good question.
Yep. And Paul, any shocks or surprises, or what in your findings?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because, you talk to you talk to people like run police stations, and what's really interesting is how knowledgeable people are about real estate. They might not be professional real estate people, but they understand that they want their buildings to perform really well. Everybody understands that, and everybody says the most important thing is the person who is in the building. It's really about the people and what we can provide for the people. So everyone really gets that, and I've been really impressed with that. And then we're all just sort of wrestling with how to do it, and I think there's also nobody knows the answers to lots of these things, and therefore we're all sort of learning as we go along. So the guy at Apple doesn't know the answers, and he's got millions of pounds to spend on his, and so we're all sort of learning as we go along, which I found really interesting. And people are really open to sort of saying, look, we're pretty good at this, but this sustainability issue in terms of how do we measure our carbon? How do we measure our waste? How can we improve this circular economy type thing where we never really throw anything out. It's a constant. So I guess we're all. What's been really interesting is we're all learning, and
Yeah,
that's a great thing. I think it's really good to see that everyone wants to understand how the buildings support the people and and the objectives, which is great.
yep, that's very good, Paul. That's certainly very good answers, and certainly a very interesting job you have, and you seem to enjoy it, which is great.
It's honestly, it's fascinating. It's amazing the people you get to talk to. Yeah, really interesting. But particularly the public sector have been really open, and I always
Yeah,
find the public sector issues like social value. I think we spoke about. The
yeah,
public sector is a long way ahead in terms of understanding those issues and how
yeah.
schools can support communities and those sorts of things.
And at the end of the day, you're there to help, so that's great.
Yeah,
Yep,
very, very.
thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Harry. Can I bring in Justin McNulty, MLA, please? Thanks.
Hi, Emmett. Hi, Paul. Very interesting discussion this morning. Tell me, guys, what level of interaction do you have with the Royal Institution for Architects Ireland, Engineers Ireland, for Institution of Structural Engineers, or the Chartered Institute of Surveyors standalone, or how do you interact with those bodies in relation to your positions on sustainability and on other issues?
Emmett's probably best on the local, but I mean, in terms of, that is a really, really important point. That's a really important point because, again, the way the industry is now structured is not, it's not sort of in silos. It can't work in silos. You can't have a conversation around buildings without talking to architects and engineers and surveyors, and there's lots of other people that you'd want to talk to as well. So we have really good relationships, sort of centrally, with those organisations. People like SIBC, who are the building services engineers, but then you also got the mechanical engineers, and and the REBA, who are the architects. So really, really crucial that we try and get that joined up. Emmett probably knows more about what's happening in Northern Ireland now.
And Justin, to be kind of really honest, we work in very close partnership with those organisations and institutions because no one aspect or no one discipline within the built environments is capable of delivering some of these projects on their own. So, as Paul says, we need architects and engineers and structural engineers and chartered surveyors and many other professions to realise some of these kind of large scale projects. So locally, we work together kind of in integrated design teams. And some chartered surveyors would employ architects and engineers in their kind of practices. So there is a high degree of collaboration across the industry, and particularly in such a small place like ours, that it's unavoidable. And it's actually one of the strengths of operating in a relatively small market is the relationships are good and strong.
Very good, very good. I asked because I'm a civil engineer myself, and my sister's an architect, so I was just curious to know what your thinking was.
I'm glad I mentioned ITE then, Justin.
Yeah, obviously. In terms of sustainability and social value, what's your thinking around schools, estates, and schools buildings? Schools obviously lend their facilities for sporting capacity, and that's fantastic. How much more can school estates, school buildings be embraced to be used in the community and more often than just during school time?
Yeah, and social values is such an interesting area. I was talking to a chap yesterday that runs the social value index, which is a sort of score about how it works. And we did some really interesting case studies around how some of the organizations you might work with would reach out to community groups and run, fantastic programs on employment to make sure that that you recruit locally and identify areas and groups that encourage them in. And I think IBOS at the moment says, "Have you got a social value plan?" Right, that's basically what it says at the moment. I think in the future we will start to get to a point where we say, "How are you measuring that plan?" And I think this is a good example of an area where the industry is learning really quickly about what we mean by social value, because there's lots of sort of definitions around it. And as I say, I think the public sector have been really good in terms of, yes, you mentioned that you make the facilities available to the community, and that's a really good indication of social value. I think in terms of employment and then running additional programs in communities, etc., that's the sort of thing we're seeing a lot more of in terms of the people you work with. So there's an expectation that anybody who's delivering a service into any building has a social value element to that contract. So when you're procuring the services, they would say, right, okay, we will recruit X amount of people, we will deliver apprenticeships, and we will spend X amount of money on, the following commitments to work with deprived groups, to sort of, learning, etc., etc. So we're seeing lots of those sorts of initiatives, and I think there's a lot that's being learned and developed as we go along. But I think the key thing is to say, do you have an understanding or a commitment to social value as part of your real estate strategy, and how is it going to support your community? And you can do it in the following ways, and and I think schools have been really good about doing that. I think we can extend it into other areas, but I think at this point it's a case of saying, what are other people doing? How are we learning? And we've got some good case studies on some of the social value issues, about, I don't know, recruiting, offenders into working in things like coffee shops and those kind of things, or funding initiatives, in communities, or, doing, sort of reading with first generation immigrant communities, etc. So it's about the supplier working really closely with the client. I think that's what we're seeing a lot of.
Okay, excellent, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Justin. Can I bring in Robbie Butler, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Emmett. Very good. And some of my questions have already been asked, but I'm going to maybe concentrate a little bit on what I believe that where the real value of this would come from, and that is that creating the therapeutic environments, which you have picked out. Obviously, this is it's a model that fits across business, and obviously, I imagine that the model then is tailored to whatever the outcomes that is required. With that in mind, our schools are very diverse areas and cater for children with various needs and abilities and so on. So does this model get down to the granular and maybe make recommendations and stuff for children who are neurodivergent and different levels of abilities and stuff? For instance, if you had autism or ADHD and that type of stuff, does it get down to that granular level, this model, do you think, or is it very strategic and high level?
It's deliberately strategic, because I think that granular level would be very specific to an organisation in the detail. So, I mean, it really kind of deliberately says, in terms of your real estate strategy, are you identifying well-being and experience as part of that strategy? Now, well-being and experience would mean something slightly different in the scenario you gave to the Apple building, and they have slightly different things. So we're just trying, I think, at this point to say to people, have you joined that up? Have you made that connection between, your air quality and your well-being? Have you made the connection between your cleaning and your well-being? And have you made the connection between the functional space and the user? The user could be any different sort of person. So that kind of case study would be absolutely brilliant to see, because again, when we talk about schools in the presentations, it's kind of, you're the experts on identifying what the challenges are. How would you address that through, whether you bring in expertise or whether you look at but how does the property support that? So it's we don't go into the granular detail. I think the plan is, in the future, what we would do is a bit like the previous question, we would develop a lot more content on things like social value, and well-being, because there's a lot of interest, and I think we're already sort of looking at how we develop better guidance to support, what would a social value plan look like, what would it cover, or how would you deliver well-being, or those kind of things in these environments. So it would be a case of kind of, I think that's down the line for us a bit.
Okay, I'm just on that, because it's a really good minute. It's genuinely a short presentation, but a really good presentation, because it really covers what you need to cover. But thinking in terms of, Paul, the journey through life for kids, so we've covered a lot of, in terms of the last 2 years in this committee, we've concentrated very much on SEN, special education needs, and that additional provision. And obviously, when we want children to learn together, that needs to be factored in. But also when they go into the workplace, and ensuring that the workplace and those businesses and industries also take that into consideration. One of the problems, I suppose, and it's starting to raise its head a little bit more, are adults with autism and those additional needs, because obviously when you leave school, those traits that are very human travel through life with you. And even in places like Google and any of those places, any workplace or any industry or any learning facility should be kind of open to everybody. But listen, I've really enjoyed your presentation this morning. Just that maybe rather than an answer, it's just a little thought maybe to.
Robbie, honestly, that's such a great. I love that question. We've been talking about this for so long, and it's a brilliant. We talk about disability discrimination, and there's been acts and things in the past where, and often the real estate strategy in relation to that is it's all about ramps and things, and it's like that's one way to look at disability, but actually autism in terms of how that impacts the building, how you flow through a building, how you use color, and how you use space, and how you use noise. There's lots of really great stuff being done in buildings that kind of reflects that. So getting people to understand that it's not just about putting in a facility or a ramp or etc. That is important, but actually it's much more complex than that. And I think the industry's understanding that again comes with a cost implication, but the benefits and the social kind of piece that makes that almost essential is really interesting. So there's some really good stuff being done. I think it's a really
I think, do you know something? I think you're literally on the cusp of something very important. Actually, just a conversation I had with one of the trusts recently about their inpatient department for mental health, and so it was no building, and I was talking to him about how can this be reconfigured in a manner. Obviously, there's your limitations, but how do you? And it was about light, it was about air quality, it was about signage, it was about lots of stuff. It was about colour, it was about even the furniture and those things. So. This is really good, important stuff. So thank you for that.
I could talk about it all day, Robbie. Honestly,
I think we would.
Because you think about an Alzheimer's unit.
I definitely can't allow you to talk about it all day. Sorry.
Sorry, Chris.
Even if it was Daniel McCrossy, we would let him.
Diane, thanks, Robbie.
Thank
okay,
you.
Can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Emmett and Paul. It really is a really fascinating presentation, and I appreciate the effort you've put in to give it to us today. And I suppose the first point that Chris made as well, that the IBS pillars absolutely will transfer to the school estate, so it's really beneficial for us to hear that. I want to touch upon the point that Pat made, and he raised about ventilation within schools and other public spaces, and in fact, probably within our own homes as well. Obviously, it's been a major focus, but particularly within schools and for us within the Education Committee. And as Pat said, windows were being opened, they were trying to increase ventilation that kind of way, and children were found out in the really cold in the schools. And then on the other hand, we have the cost of living crisis and the cost of energy crisis and that. And I know loads of schools are really struggling with their budgets because the cost of heating the school has really imploded. So I'm just wondering, from your point of view, are there any kind of structural ways that you can meet the needs of ventilation within a building, and by also cutting energy costs as well?
Yeah, crikey, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of that will come down to the earlier point about how are we engaging with engineers and architects to design buildings that are better for those kind of issues, because I think that's looking forward. We have to design better buildings with that in mind, because at the moment, we have lots of old buildings that really weren't developed with the user in mind, or sustainability or performance. They were just designed either because the architect liked the look of it, or just because that's how all the other buildings looked. And so I think we've got a real issue. It's a huge challenge. I mean, just in terms of how we design and develop, and then there's conversations that you're going to have at a real estate level where you say, actually, we have to make a decision. Are we going to retrofit this building? Are we going to do something to change that because the costs are so high, etc.? Or are we just going to find a better building? What's the estate's solution to these kind of issues? Are we just going to move to new schools, or are we going to try and retrofit old schools? Because at the moment, lots of buildings, I think you'll find, are it's going to be very difficult for them to, in the context of what they're working with, to improve some of their the cost of heating and make the building more sustainable. So there's some really, really difficult issues ahead. Conscious that cost is going to be a central pillar, and moving to a new school is not an easy thing to do, and building new schools is not an easy thing to do. So I think if you look at this as a 20-year kind of initiative, we have to start thinking much more closely about what sort of buildings we're designing with those questions in mind, because they just hasn't been looked at, I don't think, closely enough.
Yeah, well, I suppose as Pat even said, some of the schools, the windows were painted shut, they weren't even fit for purpose, that kind of way for the ventilation. So absolutely that needs to be looked into. And I'm not sure, I'll not be able to answer that question, whether or not to be able to, retrospectively improve schools or move them into new buildings, whatever. But I think just because we know that their kind of energy, the cost of energy is increasing so much, it's something we should be putting focus on, because it's a huge burden on schools and for all public spaces and for homes, So I think it's an important one. But listen, I really appreciate that, Paul, and thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. I definitely don't think windows painted shut would clear IBOS Pillar 1 compliance in relation to air quality. So you could see how that would be useful. But and like I said earlier, that's half tongue in cheek, half not, Nicola, in that a simple assessment, pillar approach there could give transparency to that. If you're selecting a school, whether as a pupil or a parent, if you're an education committee, you feel like there should be more transparency around this type of information, so it could be really useful in that regard. I think that's all, members that wish to ask questions, and Conscious Assembly plenary starts at 10:30 today. So Emmett and Paul, thanks so much indeed for your engagement today. I hope and believe that might be the start of an engagement for you with the Education Committee, and I would really hope that the Department of Education would be looking to engage with you as well. We'll certainly, in our actions following from today, be asking, to what extent they will engage with these matters, to what extent any of this approach is already in place. If we can do anything to help your engagement with the Department of Education, we'd be glad to do so as well.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. Good to see you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Emmett.
Thank you, Chair.
All the best.
See you soon.
Okay, members, can I ask broadcasting to remove witnesses and to bring members back into the spotlight, and ask the clerk to summarise any actions for that briefing?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not muted, am I?
Nope.
Good stuff. So, that was an interesting conversation. So I think the main thing is to ask DE, in what way the department is measuring and monitoring air quality in schools, and then to ask about this, the range of parameters that were described by our witnesses just now. Really, I suppose those are the International Building Operation Standards benchmarking pillars, and they maybe input considerations to the school estate that aren't routinely applied. So we can ask to what extent the department is applying those in construction and maintenance. Members were asking about what can be done retrospectively, so in terms of retrofitting or finding structural solutions to issues like energy use and ventilation in a COVID scenario. Obviously, the Scottish have announced that they're going to remove part of the lower part of doors to allow some more ventilation at a structural level. But the discussion was very wide-ranging about sustainability, planning for sustainability, what you can do after the event, what needs to be planned ahead, and intuitive design as well, to take account of the range of sensory experiences that pupils and staff and school users of all kinds will have in a building. So really, really wide-ranging. So if members are content, then we would just reflect to the department the gist of the presentation, ask how DE currently monitors and whether DE currently applies those pillars.
Okay.
Does that sound okay?
Yeah, members content with those actions or wish to add any others?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. Members, we're almost through business here. I'm conscious that Assembly plenary is commencing shortly. We've two more substantive items. So agenda item 8 is the Education Curriculum Minimum Content Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2022 Statutory Rule 2022-45. Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to keep members in the spotlight and to add witnesses, and refer members to a statutory rule, SR 2022-45, the Education Curriculum Minimum Content Order Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2022 at page 355 of your meeting packs. The committee considered the draft statutory rule at its meeting on the 26th of January, and at that time the committee was content with the proposal. The rule is subject to negative resolution, and there have been no changes to the policy content since the committee's consideration. The examiner of statutory rules has yet to report on the technical aspects of the rule, and if the committee is content with the rule, this is obviously in relation to CPR, Clark, yes?
Chair, yes, Chair.
Okay. So I think there was clear consensus and that we were content with the rule. So if I can put the question then, that the Committee for Education has considered SR 2022-45, the Education Curriculum Minimum Content Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the examiner of statutory rules being content with the technical aspects of the rule, has no objection to the rule. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you, members. Okay, agenda item 9 is any other business. Clerk and members, could I suggest that we write to the Education Minister to ask and indeed request that the report of the review into restraint and seclusion is published before the end of the mandate, as was indicated? Members content to agree?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Any other business, members?
Chair, could I just raise one issue?
Yeah.
And it relates to the withdrawing of funding for Irish Medium Youth Service in Belfast. And Glór na Móna have been told that their funding is to be cut by 98%. It effectively puts them out of business. And there have been ongoing discussions for a number of years now about providing core funding for Irish Medium Youth Services. And it's very disappointing. Paul Maskey has been taking the lead for us in this area. And of recent times, the Education Authority are avoiding meetings, avoiding phone calls and so on. So it's very disappointing. And I'm wondering, could we write to the Education Authority and ask them for an update and an explanation as to why this funding has been cut?
Members content to agree?
Content, yeah.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, members, any other business? No. Okay, then our next formal committee meeting is on Wednesday, the 2nd of March, via Starlight, again at 9 a.m, given the Assembly plenary scheduled for that day. There's no meetings prior to that, informal meetings prior to that, Clark?
Sorry, Chair, my computer crashed. We have a youth engagement on the 24th, which is tomorrow evening,
Okay.
about mental health with young children and young people.
If you could re-email details of that to all of us, and ask members to reply to you regards their availability, that would be great.
I will indeed.
Okay. Okay, members, I put the question, the committee meeting does now adjourn. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members.